I remember when the first time we met, you were working on your graduate work and you were going up the ladder and you were coming to the conclusion, with all of these things being knocked down, that you were saying, I think we can make intelligent design into a scientific discovery. Why did you believe that intelligent design was needed to explain what you were seeing?
Well, I encountered Professor Kenyon at a conference when I was early in my scientific career, and a colleague of his named Charles Thaxton, who had just written a book titled The Mystery of Life's Origin. And Thaxton, in that book, detailed many of the kinds of problems that we've been talking about with the attempt to explain the origin of information necessary to build the first living cell. And he, in an epilogue to that book, floated the idea that with the information-bearing properties of DNA, we were seeing evidence of what he called an intelligent cause, because we know intuitively that information's a mind product. And so a year later, I set off to Cambridge to begin work in my graduate work, and I eventually did a PhD on origin of life biology. And while I was doing that work, I was always thinking about whether or not this idea of intelligent design could be developed into a rigorous scientific argument. And oddly, it was another Charles that really helped me crack this nut, because Charles Darwin, in The Origin of Species, used a very special method of scientific reasoning known as inference to the best explanation.
This is very interesting.
And it was crucial for scientists trying to reconstruct events in the remote past, because we don't get to replicate events in the laboratory if we're talking about the origin of life or the origin of the Cambrian animals or something like that. So we've got to use detective-style reasoning to figure out what happened and what caused those events to happen. The idea of inference to the best explanation is that you infer that cause which, if true, would best explain the phenomena in question. But that raised the question, what does it mean to be a best explanation? And Darwin had a mentor as well, and his name also was Charles, and that was Charles Lyell. And one day I was reading the title page of his famous book on the principles of geology, and the subtitle, long, boring Victorian subtitle, being an attempt to explain the former changes of the Earth's surface by reference to causes now in operation. And when I came across that phrase, which was crucial to Lyell and Darwin's whole method, a light went on for me, because I asked myself a question. What is the cause now in operation that explains the origin of digital code? Their idea was that if you want to decide what explanation best explains something in the remote past, you want to invoke a cause which is known in our present experience to be able to produce the effect in question. Makes perfect sense. So what's the cause that we see in our present experience that produces digital code? And I realized that there was only one. Chance didn't do it, necessity didn't do it, chance plus necessity didn't do it, but we do know of a cause that produces information, and that cause is intelligence or mind. And so when you think on the quote we've cited a few times from Bill Gates, DNA is like a software program, and only much more complex than any we've ever created, that's highly suggestive, because we know from our uniform and repeated experience, from our knowledge of causes in operation, that there's one cause that produces digital information, and that is intelligence. In fact, whenever we see information, again, whenever we see it, it always comes from a mind, not a material process. Whether we're talking about computer code, or an alphabetic text, or a hieroglyphic inscription, or the information we embed in radio signals, it always comes from a mind. So using Darwin's method of reasoning, his inference to the best explanation method, I concluded that the best explanation for the origin of information necessary to produce the first cell is not chance or necessity, physical chemical necessity, or the combination of the two, but instead it's intelligent design. And that's a conclusion that's based on our uniform and repeated experience, the basis of all scientific reasoning. And in fact, the twist here is that I actually used Darwin's method of reasoning to make the argument for intelligent design.
Yeah, and to deny his own theory of Darwinian evolution.
I eventually went on to challenge Darwinism, but initially I applied this just to the question of the origin of life and the information necessary to build it.